Alright guys, so I've got some big news regarding the usage of rosewood in musical instruments and guitars in particular. Now, I know a lot of you already know, back in 2017, a new regulation went into effect that essentially restricted the importing and exporting of rosewood, and guitar companies and all sorts of musical instrument companies could not use rosewood anymore in their instruments. Now, this regulation was created by CITES, or CITES, which is the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora. It's basically a bunch of government representatives from different countries that have gotten together to work to protect endangered species. So like I said, back in 2017, this new regulation went into effect and essentially highly restricted the importing and exporting and the usage of rosewood. Now, this was actually in response to the Chinese furniture industry that had been using so much rosewood, it was rapidly depleting the entire global supply. So to put a stop to this, CITES just said, no more rosewood, that's it. But of course, rosewood is used for other things, and in particular, a lot of musical instruments depend on rosewood as a choice tone wood. I mean, of course, guitar players know it as one of the three main woods that's used for fretboard materials, with the other two being maple and ebony. So in the guitar world, this was a really big deal. Now, there were some arrangements where if a company had a big stockpile of rosewood that it already had, they could still use it, but they had to be able to prove that they got the rosewood prior to when that regulation went into effect. And there was a bunch of paperwork involved, a bunch of bureaucracy, and it ended up being so costly and tedious that most companies just went to other kinds of wood for their fretboards. Now, this created a period of a couple of years where it was sort of a wild west when it came to fretboard materials. And a lot of companies went to some really interesting choices like jatoba or African blackwood, baked maple was used a lot more, or even amaranth or rosicer. Now, during this whole time when rosewood was heavily restricted, NAMM, the National Association of Music Merchants, and yes, that's the same NAMM that puts on the big conventions every year, they were arguing that essentially the amount of wood that's used for musical instruments is tiny compared to what was being used in the Chinese furniture industry. And so because of that, there should be an exception for musical instruments. Well, the big news now is that CITES has agreed with that argument, and they have written in an exception to the regulation specifically for musical instruments. That means that all the guitar companies that had to switch to other woods can go back to using rosewood. Now, obviously, for guitar players and other musicians that rely on wooden instruments, this is a really big victory because, of course, you know, a lot of those instruments historically and today have relied on rosewood as one of the main materials. That being said, I wouldn't mind if some of the companies kept using some of the other woods they were using in place of rosewood. I mean, the big three, right, like I said, are maple, rosewood, and ebony, but it's nice to have more choices than that. We'll have to see how that plays out and see how the big manufacturers react to this new regulation changing and the exemption for musical instruments. And again, this exemption is only for musical instruments. The wood is still highly restricted for use like in the furniture industry. We really have to give some big props to NAMM, the National Association of Music Merchants, for fighting this good fight for guitar players and musicians everywhere. Alright guys, so I would really like to know what you think of this new change and what you think about rosewood being able to be used once again for musical instruments. Let's continue the conversation in the comment section below. As always guys, if you enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up, subscribe for more if you haven't already, hit the notification bell, and I'll see you next time.